Boy. Ironically, if you'd done that back then, we wouldn't be having this
Part of the wedding
conversation,
party.
you know?
Check.
Girls.
Oh, yeah.
That's okay.
Yep, my daughter just bought her third house.
There's a lot of,
That was the good
Still
one.
have the other two?
Oh, yeah.
One
Oh,
side
yeah,
of the road,
yeah,
this side goes
yeah,
to this, the
yeah.
other side goes to that.
She got one rented.
That's right.
And the other one she plans on
yeah, and the only,
fixing up for
the You're up.
All right, well, good evening. Welcome to the Growth Planning Committee's meeting for July, what is that? 17th, 2018. And we'll start off every meeting like we always do with the introduction of members and guests. So Abby?
Abby Sherwin, Southern Maine Planning and Development Commission.
Warner Gilliam.
Mike Corsi.
James McMahon.
Dan Saunders?
Barbara Barwise.
Jim Fitzgerald.
And Paul Hogan.
All right. So I'd like to welcome Jim as a now full-time member of the GPC. He was the alternate, and Mike is a new alternate on our board. And we also have another new alternate who's not here at the moment, Janet Powell. So we'll have a full board, which is excellent. So we'll start off with the first thing on the agenda, which is the approval of minutes from June 4th, 2018.
So moved. Second.
Any discussion on the minutes? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much, Barbara.
You're welcome.
I do have one thing I'd like to add to our agenda, and that is we have to elect our chair and secretary for the coming year. We have to do it at the first meeting after the annual meeting. So I will take motions for chair.
And I would nominate Dan Saunders as the chair.
Second.
Whoa.
Sorry.
Any other nominations? Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Nomination for vice chair?
Jim Fitzgerald.
I was going to say no nominations.
Jim Fitzgerald.
That's a first or a second?
I'll second.
Any other nominations? Okay, any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
And any nomination for secretary?
I nominate Barbara.
Thanks, Jim.
Here a second?
Second.
All right. Any other nominations? All in favor? All right, great. Thank you very much. Okay, 4-1. You're still it. Okay. All right, so comments from guests, received mail, news from other committee board reps. So we do have a couple letters that we received, emails. Came in July 16th and July 17th.
Yep.
Should we read these, or would you?
You know,
don't get
so-
these often, so I appreciate the feedback.
Yeah, so once we get, any comments that's directed to growth planning, then we pass those on to you all. The comments and concerns, from what I gathered were specific to, agenda item 3, and this was the review of the growth area map. So, as you all recall, we had a number of meetings and discussions over revisions to the town's growth area map, which led to a revision to the land use ordinance, which gives the growth planning committee the authority to do a review of the growth area maps and update those maps in order to reflect current infrastructure development. So as a result, parcels can be reclassified to reflect their actual access to municipal infrastructure such as sewer and water. And, so as you recall, well, just as a reminder, as part of that discussion, the question was, well, what happens when the original assumptions that were used for, the parcel designations change? And so as a reminder, this, the original map was developed in 2010. And for those of you that worked on it in 2010, there was a number of different iterations that we went through. I think we went through probably 4 or 5 different drafts of the map before we settled on this piece. But didn't really have a good mechanism to deal with, what happens whenever things, assumptions change. And that, quite frankly, really is the case with a good number of the maps that are in the comp plan, that facts change, and there ideally should be a better mechanism to update the maps to show actual conditions. So the comments that we received from a couple of members of the public, and I believe we have members of the public here tonight that will probably also want to provide some comment, on you know, the thought process and you know, some proposed changes to the growth area map. In particular, and this was also, you know, discussed as part of our meetings, was the recognition that, you know, when subdivisions go through a process of getting approval for municipal sewer and water, that their classification, you know, may change at that point, you know, if they fit within, you know, the definitions of how they may be classified in the comp plan. So that's a little bit of the background, you know, that we'd gone through, you know, the warrant article, which passed. Growth planning now has, you know, the authority to look at these maps and make those periodic changes to this particular map.
Okay.
Keeping in mind that this doesn't change the number of growth permits that are available in town. Currently, the number of growth permits that are available in town on an annual basis is 40. Those growth permits are split up, 20 in the growth area, and then you have 12 for the transition area and 8 for the rural area. So that number classification, that doesn't change, that formula doesn't change. You know,
Right.
but you're merely pulling from a different pool of growth permits.
Right.
So,
The total.
So are we going right into the discussion item?
Well, we're just bringing up has everyone had an opportunity to read through the
I have.
information? Okay, good. But just to add to that, the number of growth permits can change over time. So it's based on the mean of the last 10 years times 110%. And it can't drop below 40.
correct.
So that was
Yeah.
put in as part of the comprehensive plan because the previous growth permits were set at 48, and half were subdivision, half were for residential in 2003, and that was to control, there was, I guess, a bunch of growth in the whole York County area, and that was to try to put a brakes on it as we were making sure that our infrastructure could manage. And so that was for a temporary cap, but the state requires that you gotta have some type of backing for what your cap is if you're gonna maintain one. And that comes through your comprehensive plan, and for that to be, to have validity, your comprehensive plan has to be approved by the state, which ours has been. So that we then put in this growth permit, which I just detailed as being 110% of the mean of the past 10 years. And then we identified the 50, 30, 20 split based on growth areas, rural areas, and transitional areas. And to get there, this took about 2 years of going from 2008 through 2009, we hired an outside firm to do some analysis of our area. They came up with a recommended layout for what we should identify as our growth areas and what should be our transition areas and what should be our rural areas, based on our infrastructure and based on what our growth plan to that date. And honestly, the transition areas were a lot bigger than what we moved towards. So that's kind of a little bit of history. It's all detailed in the minutes of our committee. So, just as an add.
So yeah, I don't know what the process wants to be for the comments that were sent.
Yeah,
but-
if there's, well, do we have a copy of the proposal?
Yeah.
So why don't we throw that out there so we can.
Hey, Warner, are there any other consequences to being in one zone or another, other than the granting of permits for construction of houses? Is there any?
Yeah, it's only for the designation of the growth permits. That's the only, that's the only thing that these 3 zones regulate.
Right.
They don't, or they're not even actually zones, they're identified as areas. But they don't regulate lot size, they don't regulate use, or anything of that nature. they merely classify for the, for the allocation of that number of growth permits.
Right. So the important part, I think, and the reason why we wanted to put that ordinance through to allow us to make changes is, the detailed in the beginning, I should find the very beginning of that section of the land ordinance talks about the fairness of the application of permits. And so as things change, as the sewer line has built out, our growth area is defined as within 1,000 feet, either on sewer or within 1,000 feet of sewer or infrastructure, water and sewer. Right, so as that changes, then in fairness, we need to change what the growth area is. So that somebody on sewer's got property and another person is on sewer who just got there. I mean, they're both meet the requirement for that growth area. And so it's important to be able to change that to reflect how our town is growing. But at the same time, it doesn't change anything other than being able to obtain permits.
Yep, so just what you see on the, what you see on the map, is just, all I've done is just indicated in red, the, approved first phase of Binnacle Hill. That's the, that was recently, approved last year, and constructed, the construction finished up the beginning of this year. That is a cluster subdivision of 15 house lots. And if you look at it, you see 2 parcels on here, but that's because there were 2 parcels that were sold together for the creation of that subdivision. So that's why you see 2 parcels there. So I also have a copy of the warrant, of the warrant article, that was done. If you all want to,
Review that.
take a copy of that, take a look at it.
So any members here or any council folks have a question you'd like to ask the board? If you do, I'd just ask you to step up to the mic so the folks at home could hear you as well. And then please state your name and residence.
Okay.
Just so we can make sure we take accurate notes. Thank you.
My name's Clancy Cotman. I'm a beachfront owner at Goose Rocks Beach. And I signed the beach use agreement with the town, and support that, and we're generally pretty happy. And, I'm not a lawyer, but I think the spirit of that agreement was that there was going to be no real changes in zoning out there. I mean, clearly there's going to be no change in commercial development. But I think the spirit was, we weren't going to accelerate growth out there. And I guess we're in a, part of it's transition, part of it's rural. And I know you all now have the authority after this last vote to change those designations and give more permits. But I think if you did that out in the Goose Rocks area, it's just not in the spirit of that agreement. Can you? All right.
Oh, okay. So, that's all I'm saying. I'm not making some big objection. I live on the west end, and things like Binnacle Hill aren't a real big deal to me. But I do think it's just, is that simply not in the spirit of what we all agreed to out there. So I think I'd just ask you all to consider that when if you make any change for these designations of areas. So that's all I had.
Yeah, and I understand what you're saying. Just for clarification, because it's not a change to zoning, technical to zoning.
No,
but I understand what you're saying. It could change the number of permits that would be available.
Right, like if you change a rural area like where, say, Binnacle Hill is, and that whole, I guess, would be the east side of New Bedford Road, you change that, you could then grant a lot more building permits and a lot more houses, which again, I think is not in the spirit of an agreement where we all, a huge amount of us, you know, expended effort to, you know, to avoid litigation. I never was a part of that, and, you know, I just, you know, wanted to come here tonight and say that.
Okay.
And not pounding the table, but
Yeah.
I think that everyone should just consider that before you make any changes in these areas. So.
You know, I think it's important to know like what the numbers are, you know, that you're dealing with. So you're, instead of pulling from a pot of 8 permits, you're pulling from a pot of 12.
Right.
You know, is what the difference is, and it's more a matter of you know what happens in any given year, you know, because the number resets itself each year.
Right, but that's a 50% increase. Right?
In terms of what's available for you know a fairly extensive area of town.
Well, I think if, you know, if you were at the meeting last night of the beach agreement, you would see here the problems of parking out there already, especially that east end of the beach. And you want to accelerate all these homes at Binnacle Hill and Binnacle Hill 2. It just seems like they've already got more problems. And again, I'm on the west end, but these east end people last night were complaining about parking. The people are already exceeding, you know, there's an agreement number in that beach use agreement of 172 parking spaces. Well, people are just ignoring that and parking up Binnacle Hill all the way down New Biddeford Road. So yeah, I know maybe it's only a few, but that's 50%. And then that you add that over the next 10 years by changing it from rural to transition, you know, it's going to multiply and everything. So anyway, that's how I feel. I don't know how other people feel like that, but I just wanted to come tonight. I never come here and speak,
No.
but
No, I appreciate
this was
it.
important enough to me.
Thank you for coming and
Thank you.
speaking.
Thank you.
Warner, should we be passing on the concern of really the parking, and if people are parking where they shouldn't be parking, then, you know, that should be addressed by, you know, we should pass that on to the town.
It is,
Yeah.
it is
Manager of
on
the
a,
police.
it is on a daily basis. We
Okay.
have 2 safety officers at the beach that are tagging cars on a regular basis. We also have a police presence on a daily basis.
Barbara, there were 2 problems pointed out last night, neither of which that addresses. One was the sign didn't go back up this year saying no parking beyond that spot, so that's been fixed. So cars were parking all the way up. But the other problem, which is a new problem, which violates, again, the spirit of the agreement, I would say, is that the Binnacle Hill big wide driveway, which looks beautiful, is now wide open and everybody's parking up there. And there's no sign to say private lane, no parking, violators will be towed away at your expense. There's nothing like that. And I know there's some discussion about having that kind of a sign on Binnacle Hill too. But certainly it would seem, while the town has Binnacle Hill 2 application before it, this is one thing it can do. If it can't send police in there to ticket cars on private property,
That's private.
but it can tell Binnacle Hill they have to, and the problem is, once a few cars park there, you know, everybody says, oh, great place.
We all face that, but we also all put up signs too.
Now, I will point out last night, I was
Well,
at
you-
that meeting last night, which I never go
missed
to
that.
2 in a row, but Laurie was there last night and she was taking notes about all the concerns and said she was gonna be on top of it. So, I mean, I think the town is well aware of the issues, so, the
But-
parking, et cetera, so
But owning on a private road is always a problem.
that's tricky, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and that is that is a difficult piece where you're dealing with a private road.
Absolutely.
You know, and that's, you know, certainly Goose Rocks has that as a chronic issue. You know, you have numerous private roads there that folks park up and down on, and that the town doesn't have any authority to go onto those private roads and police illegal parking that may be happening. I mean, that's really up to the property owners at that point to handle.
But the town is
but I do-
allowing new private roads right in the peak parking area.
But I do agree, I
which
do
is
agree
causing-
that those concerns should be brought to the planning board.
Yep.
So phase 2 of Binnacle Hill will be on the planning board's August agenda. And so, I think that's a perfectly reasonable thing to bring up to the planning board to suggest putting some type of requirement for signage that makes it clear that,
have
that those roads are not to be used for public parking.
Is it a private road or a private driveway? Is there a difference?
It's a private road.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, like me, I could allow people to park on my driveway if I wanted. So is there a difference?
As guests, you
Yes.
know,
Right.
as your guests, I
Right.
mean, certainly you can
Right.
have people park in your
Not
driveway.
that I'm endorsing it, but,
Right.
you know, the owners of this place, has anybody asked them or approached them to say, people are parking there,
Yeah.
are you objecting to it, or are you just allowing it to happen?
Well, the issue
You know what I
only,
mean?
only got brought up last night,
Oh,
so.
okay, yeah,
Yeah.
You know.
yeah.
And I actually suspect when Pinnacle Hill builds some homes there, then they may start enforcing it a little more once there's actually
Well, yeah,
people living
sure.
there.
The people that
Yeah,
live
but
there
it's gonna get
probably gonna be
worse.
like, I don't want you parking
I don't want
outside
this
the house.
parking, so.
Yeah.
Clancy, it's going to get worse though, because all of those people in all of those homes, they're going to drop off their gear, and they're going to do what? There's no parking available, so they're going to go back and they're going to leave their cars in their private road, which doesn't have a restrictive covenant, as far as I know, against owners parking out there. And when they park out there, you know, they could adopt whatever rules they want as a common owners of that road, or whatever the setup is, right? But there's no restrictions in that section of the road that, or any section of the road, I guess, that people can't park. I don't know if it creates a fire hazard problem.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, Pinnacle, Hill, the road is not, it's not designed for, for for on-street parking. It's not like Kings Highway where there's, there's area that's there. But again, I think, as I said, it's certainly, I think, a good point to bring up to the planning board, and I think a good thing to request the developer to, to have that type of restriction put in place so, that, future owners are aware, of that.
Well, thank you, and I think you understand my
Thank you.
concern.
Yep, thank you very much.
The agreement with the town, is it pretty elaborate, or is it worthy of just talking? Not that I'm raising caution that we get into this is specific, but overall in general, I have a concern with us starting to get to the point where we start telling private owners what to do with their property. I don't agree with that.
The beach
But,
use, the
so
beach use.
so how,
The beach use agreement, Jim, reflects only from the wall to the water. And that is the area of concentration.
There are
Parking-
also all kinds of covenants and restrictions on the town,
Parking issues.
off the beach,
Yes,
So,
but parking issues.
and zoning.
But parking issues need to be covered.
Yeah.
by
They are
the
covered in the
planning-
agreement.
By the
So-
planning board. We got
They're under
numbers.
the beach use agreement.
Well,
The
no,
numbers.
the beach use agreement, limited a certain number of
Parking.
public on-street parking spaces, and there were a number of diagrams that were included in the beach use agreement
Right.
that generally show where those, where
Yep.
those parking spaces are located, but there was a set number of how many public parking spaces, could be established, so. And this is a question that has come up, I've had folks ask, well, what happens when, if Pinnacle Hill becomes a public road, then what? Well, I think the reality of that point, then, now you actually have some enforcement, because there is a beach use agreement. It identifies the areas in which there's public parking. Pinnacle Hill is not included within that diagram because certainly the beach use agreement was crafted beforehand. And so, at that point, you actually would get police enforcement of on-street parking then.
so how wide is it? Like, I know, like,
Build to spec.
to build a driveway, I mean, you need at least, what, 12 feet for fire or emergency. They run the risk as private owners, if they're allowing people to park, they run the risk of emergency vehicles can't get in there.
Right.
Eventually they're gonna, I assume.
Road's about 20 feet in width,
Okay.
as
But
far as
still,
the travel.
It's already
the
quite
travel
difficult to
width.
get fire apparatus in the Goose Rocks.
Yeah.
Having driven
But
a
I'm
few-
talking about Pinnacle itself, if they're allowing cars on either side, you run the risk, if there's an actual emergency and you can't move
Yeah.
those cars,
Yeah.
you're in trouble.
Yeah.
But, they run the risk of that.
Which is, it's all fine and good, but I think as Werner has noted, I think that's really a planning board type
Planning
issue.
board it is.
Because this is specifically, because planning board will approve a subdivision, all this does is how fast is that subdivision gonna get built? That's all it is.
But you all now have the authority to change that.
We can change that, absolutely, absolutely. Right. So that's, I mean, I think that's the part we really should kind of focus on, the parking and all that stuff, we can't change, planning board can change that. Something like this, then maybe we do want to have, someone just look at it from a legal standpoint and make sure we're not infringing on what was agreed to within the beach use. I'm not a lawyer, I don't know the details on that. But specifically, my point is we have growth areas, transitional areas, and rural areas. I think this is a map that it can't be static because things change in our town. And we have, we've identified a growth area as being an area that's within 1,000 feet of sewer. So we extend the sewer line, we extend the growth area. You extend the growth area, you start to potentially change your transitional areas in your rural
And
areas.
that's
Because
my
we're gonna,
point, though, that's against the spirit, though. I mean, these things
Well-
all interlock somehow, the beach use agreement.
Well, the beach use agreement, as I understand it, was specific that the town wouldn't engage in any attempts to change the zoning that would encourage commercial development within the Goose Rock zone. And so.
Or intensify residential if it would have a material impact upon the
And
beach.
in
Two qualifiers.
intensifying residential, intensifying residential would be the effect of having smaller lot sizes, so that you would have a higher density than what's currently allowed. That would be an intensification,
Not just
of that.
commercials, which seems to be an intensification.
Well, so residential single-family homes are permitted use in the Goose Rock zone. And so it's already something that's currently within the zoning. And so it's not an infringement, by allowing residential home development when it's a permitted use. The planning board governs, when they look at a subdivision plan, they're looking at they're looking at the space and bulk standards, they're looking at the specifics of the lot, but ultimately it's more about, the numbers in the arrangement, and not necessarily whether or not it's a permitted use or not. Again, residential, single-family homes, and residential development, in general, is permitted in Goose Rocks.
And I guess I'm only bringing the point that you're gonna potentially could add a lot more permits out there. I think controlled growth, 80 a year, whatever you're saying is good. You change the designation, you can go to 12 times 10 years, all of a sudden that's a lot more homes, so.
Well, it's 80
But
year,
it-
whenever you look at the map, that's probably, encompasses, a good, I wouldn't say quite half of town, but, it's a pretty significant chunk of acreage. Now, granted, a lot of it is in conservation, and so, so that, that's part of the reason why that number is relatively small.
A lot of it's already built, Warren, you probably know better than I do. Look, I mean, there's so many homes out there already.
You'd be surprised, there's a fair amount of undeveloped land that's in town, that has the potential for development, and so.
Like behind the GRBA building, that area.
Oh, no, I'm not specific about Goose Rocks, but I'm referring more to the, to the rural area of town and kind of town in general.
that's 40 permits is for the whole town.
For the whole, you're right.
8 is for the whole rural
Yeah.
section, 12 is for the whole transitional section, whether
Yeah.
it's a subdivision or it's a private ownership.
Yeah,
right?
and so as a
And
matter of
subdivisions can only get
context.
7. Right? If I'm not, please correct me if I'm
So-
mistaken. So a subdivision person can only get 7 permits total.
Well, no, not exactly. So you're thinking of the old language, where it was, where we had this designation within the actual subdivisions. Now, what the ordinance does say is that, at the beginning of the year, any one individual or developer could apply for up to 7.
Yeah.
However, they're limited to that until December 1.
Right.
And then December 1, if there's any that are left, within, whatever particular zone they're in, then,
They can apply for
the
those.
theory being is that, at that point, December 1, everybody else who's looking to build has had an opportunity and a chance to apply, and then, whatever's left is eligible.
How
Also.
often has that happened? How often has that happened that,
Oh, it hasn't happened yet.
that December 1st, the developers jump in and?
No, it hasn't happened yet, and,
Okay.
and to note as well, last year we issued, so out of available number of 40, we issued 19, new home permits, out of that, number of 40, and, this year, sometimes it's tough to gauge, in the middle of the year, what we're gonna have for demand, but, what we've issued so far with what I think might come, I mean, there's the potential to maybe hit 30, but, you know, I think that's a generous, you know, that's a generous assumption. I think it'll probably be more along the lines of, you know, somewhere between, you know, 20, 26 maybe, you know.
And any leftover permits as a 12-1 can only be used
In the growth
in
area.
the growth area,
Correct.
or if it's a transitional area that they're in and hasn't been used, it can be used.
That's
right?
correct, yeah.
But you can't take.
Explain that part again. If something was
So
in,
on December 1st.
Right.
Right? Let's say there's been 20 permits issued total, 10 in growth, 5 in transition, 5 in rural,
right,
right? On December 1st, you still have 10 left in the growth permit area. And those can only be used in growth permits, so someone can come in and try to get those 10. The ones that are in transition can only be used in transition or could be used in growth. And the ones in rural can only be used in rural or could be used in growth. So, you know, if someone had a big subdivision and they waited December 1st and they wanted to put in another 20, they could take 10
Got it.
from the growth, 10 from the, as long as their subdivision was within the growth area.
Right. Yeah.
So you can't take growth permits for the growth area and put them into rural or
Right.
put them in transition.
Yeah, and so what the
The
language.
idea is we're trying to put growth towards where the infrastructure is, but people want their 7 acres, right? Or they want, you know, wherever they want that, which is, you know, that's our right. We're Americans. We work hard, we buy property, and we want to be able to do what we want on property.
Okay, so you mean, so the green area is only 8,
Correct.
Only 8 for the whole year.
not just here at Goose Rocks?
No.
That's correct.
Whole
Whole
thing.
area.
Okay.
That's right.
And is
But
Pinnacle,
if you change this, then
Well, depending on how they change it, yeah. The yellow would, anywhere is yellow would be 12.
it would be 12, so.
And then
Correct.
the very lighter color is the growth area, and that's the 20.
That's the 20. Yeah.
And hearing that we only had 30 this past year, I don't see that number 40 changing very soon.
No, I mean,
Yes.
you know, I haven't run the numbers out, you know, but right now, you know, if you look at the, you know, we have to, you know, based on the ordinance, we look at the past 10 years of growth, and then, you know, the next number that's available is 110% of that number. And so, you know, I mean, we had a fair number of years that were pretty lean, you know, for new construction. I mean, we had some years where we issued like 8 permits, and so, you know, it's going to be a good number of years before we actually hit the 40. You know, at this point right now, the formula is still pretty low. You know, I want to say if we actually followed the formula and didn't use that minimum number,
Yeah.
we'd be
Yeah.
we'd be like in that 25,
Right,
you know,
right.
that 25, 26 range. So,
The only other exclusions, and you have to, and you're right on that, is affordable housing does provide some changes because of state law, right? So we can't just say, oh, there's no more growth permits, so you can't put affordable housing in. So that does have an opportunity to make some changes.
Ward, a quick question on sewer. When the sewers came in, well, first of all, is everything in white sewered?
Should be within 1,000 feet.
Within
or
1,000
on.
feet?
yeah, so,
And-
yeah, and the white is generally either sewered or within 1,000 feet of
Got it.
sewer.
And was there hardship allowed in the original, when the sewers came in? People, I wasn't here then, but people told me if it came down your street, you had to connect. Were there hardships where people didn't have to connect?
Were there hardships where folks?
Someone said, oh, I'm 350 feet from the road, it's going to cost me, you know.
There is
Yes.
a distance.
So the ordinance, specifies that, that you have to tie in if you're within 200 feet. You know, so if your house is within 200 feet of the sewer, you're obligated to tie in. Now, there is a process within the sewer ordinance that allows for an appeal to the Board of Selectmen. And it's a formula based on, you know, the cost to tie in versus a percentage of the assessment of the structure. We recently had an appeal just like that a couple of months ago for a property down on Wilds District that was on a septic. You know, the septic needed to be replaced. The house was within 200 feet. But, you know, due to the presence of, you know, ledge and some other, you know, site constraints, they were, you know, they petitioned to the Board of Selectmen to be able to do a septic replacement as opposed to tying to the sewer.
Was it in a sensitive area? I mean, because if you're on ledge and you put a septic in, you know where that's going.
So it was.
It's not very absorbent.
I mean, I can tell you that the septic design, you know, I mean, was consistent with, you know, it didn't require any variances for the depth delimiting factor, you know, which is, you know, I think is the more critical, you know, the more critical component there, so.
Sorry to get us
You
off
saying,
track.
was it on ledge, or was it that
Well,
the
there was-
ability to pump it out
There
had to
was,
deal with ledge?
there was ledge between, you know, between the house and getting to the sewer.
Which would have been really
You know,
not
so-
cost effective, it's just easy, okay.
That's
And you brought up
correct.
a point,
I'm
if,
very patient.
for somebody that already built a septic, say a $15,000 septic or whatever, I mean, until that fails, that's when it becomes noted that, you know.
Yeah, I
you
mean,
have to tie
I
in,
can't
you know
speak
what I
to
mean?
how, you know, when the sewer was first run, you know, in the eighties, you know, what exactly, what
Right.
exactly occurred there, but, you know, you were doing a lot of replacement of cesspools and things like that, and so that's, you know, I think what led to the mandates.
We have a very
But-
patient gentleman
Thank you very
waiting.
much, Barbara, and I apologize for not stepping in earlier.
No trouble. I'll go ahead. My name is Marc Villet. I'm a relatively newcomer to town. We've been, or should I say, new owner. We've been on the east end of the beach for 5 years now, although Judy's family's been there for many years. And I'd like to speak here a little bit, echo Mr. Gottman with the spirit of the spirit of that agreement, because we came specifically about 5 years ago and we invested at the beach to the back there, because we had seen that the town had finally come to an agreement with the owners in terms of what would be, at the very least in the spirit of that agreement, a controlled growth of that area. And it was also backed up by the actual land use effect that those places were designated with particular acreage and you know, all those things. By the way, I'm learning a tremendous amount of detail and technical minutiae here, but I think we need to step away a little bit from that technical thing. The bottom line is that people are seeing that we are trying to grow too fast, too quickly at the beach, and if we do so, we are headed to have various issues. Parking has been noted here. It's you know, remains to be tested for a bit longer, but we have issues of effluence, you know, by the little river. So we have to be mindful of what we are doing, you know, in terms of growth. And on the one hand, I want to commend you to adapt and to allow maybe the zoning to be somewhat nimble, but this is not quite software development where we go, you know, I'm in a software development and we have a new version, you know, every other week. When we go with land use, I think we are to look in terms of generations. You know, the plan was established about 10 years ago, and I did not realize this is something I learned here. It was based on the idea that if you're within 1,000 feet of the sewage line, then it becomes growth. And then, well, let's just move the line, and that way we'll have more growth. But I think that this, in many ways, is not really the good way to see it. So, again, I'm here to kind of bear witness with the idea that if we continue allowing growth to that area in particular, we are going to have, you know, more issues and possibly a renewal of the front and the back beach owners with those issues. So I would advise to be cautious in terms of your decision to move forward with that.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You know, one thing too, just to note, and sometimes that folks don't, you know, maybe don't necessarily understand, you know, the process that ordinance amendments go through. But, you know, these ordinance amendments, you know, all, you know, get reviewed by the town attorney. And so, and, you know, and this, you know, the possibility of this specific one was, you know, was discussed. And so, you know, as we went through that process, you know, it was noted that, you know, the attorney, the town attorney did not find that there was a conflict with the beach use agreement with this. But, so just so folks know, I mean, you know, these ordinance amendments and changes get vetted, you know, get vetted through a process.
Hi, my name's Greg Burns. I live at 6 Benson Avenue. And Benson Ave is located way down here in the Kings Grant area. So that last little yellow piece going down the Little River, and the Kings Highway goes pretty much, right along the river. And then Benson Avenue sits back, runs parallel. And then behind us, it's all that nice green that's there. And we bought our piece of property back in December of '92 after having come here for a number of years and rented cottages. And when the kids were little, we used to go out in the back area there and, go on hikes and cross-country ski in the winter. That area
Very picky.
is loaded with ledge and lots of wetlands and vernal pools. And I think that what happened with Binnacle One, there was a lot of land that they, just weren't going to be able to build on. Or if they tried to build there, the cost would be so expensive with all the blasting that they would need that it wasn't going to be viable. And I'm really concerned when I look at that squiggly red line for Binnacle One, if that changes, then I would see Mr. Bowley expressing an interest to take his next piece, Binnacle Two, and make that into a transitional. Because you've got 15 houses on Binnacle One, and I believe it's 13 on Binnacle Two. So that's 28 total. And to move things along at 12, available per year, get things started now, and within a couple of years, everything is developed and everything is done. Also, when you go down New Biddeford Road, after the piece that, is Binnacle One now, there's a lot of open land there, which again, is the same kind of land, kind of rough and wet, but the property owners of those parcels, if all of a sudden now we've got this nice new piece of transition, just beyond that, I could see them starting to think, hey, maybe we could put something in over here. So now you've taken that whole eastern side of New Biddeford Road and completely changed it. Maybe 10 years from now, you drive down there, and all you're going to see on the right-hand side of the road, instead of all that nice trees and stuff, you're just going to see roads going in and houses. So I think you really, my hope would be that we could slow things down, kind of keep it the way that it is. I know everybody we love our location because it's so quiet. And we don't get a lot of people that drive down there. Usually if they are, they're lost. They don't really know where, the paved road ends and the dirt road starts. So it's just a really nice kind of quiet place to live. Thanks.
Thank you, Craig. Appreciate your comments, but I just want to, again, reiterate, this doesn't change the zoning. So whether or not someone could put one house in this, potentially, because those 12 are available to everybody in yellow, wouldn't be just available to that person, if that got extended to them. So
Hi.
it doesn't change what it would look like in some future time. 50 years from now, it'd look all the same.
Yeah, I
Right,
mean,
so that's-
as a practical example, being in transition, Mills Road subdivision is close to completion. And the practical reality of it is that, and again, this isn't what the developer of the Mills Road subdivision is doing, but if that were a condominium development, which it isn't, but if it were, and at that point, the developer could come in and pick up 7 at the beginning of the year, and at that point now you're looking at, the remaining, those remaining 5 there for the rest of the transition.
But in your example, say for 7, and the minimum size lot is what for that area? What is the lot size for that area? Because I know in rural, it's 3. Is it 3 or is it?
Well, so what you're not seeing on here is you're not seeing the zone boundaries,
Yeah.
which are different. So these are just rate of growth areas. And so within that, so within the rural area, you have a mix, you have a mix of 3-acre lot sizes, and you have a mix of 40,000 square foot lot sizes. Now, keep in mind that's a net lot size, so that's a buildable, land area. So, the practical reality when you do the, when you do the math on the land is that you very rarely actually come up with, 3 acres, just a 3-acre lot. More than likely there's constraints. You've got some wet, and things like that, and so it's usually more like 4 or 5 by the time it's all said and done. Same thing with the 40,000. These last couple subdivisions, they follow that density, but they're approved as cluster subdivisions, so the overall density of the development, meets that zoning criteria, so it meets the 40,000, square foot per lot, but they have, in some cases, they have smaller lot sizes. Again, the density is, meets the zoning, but the lot sizes themselves are smaller. As an example, you may have a lot that's a 20,000 square foot lot in there, but know that that other 20,000 square feet is offset into open space.
So, but to say, for example, 13 houses in Pinnacle 1, it covers how big of an area? Just, do you know offhand? I'm just saying the comments. I'm trying to say, what can we control if people are just desiring the beach area? I mean,
Lots are the most expensive, for sure, in town.
yeah. I mean, it's like, how many permits do we give out? How many people actually drop off? I mean, I know when I go down there, I get dropped off because we can never find a spot, and I don't park in any of the areas that I shouldn't be parking. But, what can we control? What parameters do we have? And, I don't know, I go back to what I've said before. I have concerns with telling private owners what they can and can't do if they want to build a house. If they desire a 3-acre, or like you said, a 7-acre lot, or if we're allowing a subdivision where we have this low density, it could happen. But we don't know what somebody decides to do when they buy it. I don't, and nor should I tell them what to do per se. I have concerns with, I understand the passion and the interest, and it's just, it's a desirable area. It's a beach, but what control do we want to allow that's going to restrict a private owner from doing what they want? I have concern with that.
Well, the growth permits have been in existence for
Right.
how many years? Zoning regulation is allowed.
Yeah, so I mean, you've had growth permits
the voters
that I'm
have
aware of since like 2003, and
Since Tim was a selectman.
right, and that came about, I want to say, when Foxbury Woods was built. I think that was the subdivision that caused the concern with that. So, I, as a general rule, growth caps, growth limits, was more of a thing, a number of years ago. Over time, I would say, good many communities have gone away from having growth caps. I mean, there is a question on the legality and the constitutionality of a growth cap, specifically because the community is under a direct obligation to show a specific constraint, that justifies the rate. So at the end of the day, you have to tie it to an actual constraint that you have. You can't just say that, well, we don't want to grow this fast. We think this number is too much. You actually have to show that there's a physical limiting factor. Whether it be a school or whether it be your sewer infrastructure or something of that nature, which quite frankly is why we changed this in the first place.
Right.
Going from the 48 number, the 2424, which was arbitrary. It wasn't actually tied to anything other than a fairness allocation between subdivision properties and non-subdivision properties. You know, so we
So-
actually tied it, you know, when we redid this, you know, we tied it back to an actual infrastructure.
So, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but if we were still under the old growth cap, these would all be built by now. Like,
Well, we would have issued 7 already.
there's 7 already.
Well,
Okay.
I mean, we don't have 7
Don't have
in front of us, but
But-
the reality of it is that, you know, at the end of the approval of the subdivision, 7 could have been issued.
Right,
You know,
okay.
um,
So, you know, so we have put in things to try to control the growth. And this was the process that we put in place at the time. And honestly, if you read the definition of the growth area, Goose Rocks Beach is on sewer. It's right, it's within 1,000 feet, but obviously that didn't make sense. Right, so we made that a transitional area. The initial versions of this area, the transitional area went all the way out to Biddeford off of Route 9. And we yanked that back as well, to some degree. I'm sorry.
That's okay, it's a nice segue to my question.
Good,
My
good.
name is Ann Kelly, and my house is on the east side of Biddeford Road that people are talking about. And I just have a question, which is the only thing that what changes the definition from growth to transitional to rural? Is it simply the presence of the sewer?
No.
What else is involved between rural and transition, I guess? is
Well,
what
if you
I'd
look
like
at,
to know.
can I answer?
Sure.
I was just
Correct.
looking at that same question myself to see whether this mechanism is wholly dependent upon facilities, sewer, or are there other factors? And there is at least one other factor, which is that the purpose of the growth management permit is to manage the town's future growth in a manner consistent with the town's comprehensive plan. And I have some problems with this proposal because of that. I think we have an ecological disaster happening and waiting to happen at Goose Rocks. And specifically, if you look at the water quality section of the comprehensive plan, it starts to have gotten into the research. We're now 10 years later. Both rivers have red tide or something. Nobody's testing, so we don't know what it is. But if I go out there on an outgoing tide, if I go out there on my stand-up paddle, there's a scum surface that's red and lovely, and we're not testing to find out what it is. The whole clam bed, the whole Kennebunkport side of the clam bed, extending from the point to the point at the end of Timber Point back to where Peg lives, exactly in your front yard, is closed off permanently by the state because the water's contaminated. And the other, you know, so I have a big problem with what's coming down the stream. Now, these houses would be on sewer, and so putting more houses on sewer isn't going to throw more, you know, fecal matter into the river, but it's going to throw a hell of a lot of nutrients into the river. The only way for it to come down is I mean, we've all watched the water pour off that hill into the field and into the streams, and when you all of a sudden take down the trees and build houses, things change and much more water is going to come down. So I think we're like 20 years behind having sustainable development out there. We've talked about adding sustainable development to the comp plan, but in New Jersey, we had huge flooding problems. And Werner, you told me this winter, if the tide had been 2 hours different, a lot more of Dock Square would have been flooded and a lot more of Goose Rocks would have been flooded. Last night, my kids have a house on New Biddeford Road, which fortunately was raised a couple of years ago. It completely was inundated by that creek, and the tide wasn't at the peak. Had the tide been at the peak, every other house around me would have been flooded. My kids' one happens to be the lowest. So I have a major concern about throwing more water from the houses waiting for the perfect storm. Last night, the guy from the state, what was he from, Werner?
Steve Dixon,
Yeah.
who's the main
He said a
from the
Cat 2
geological-
storm would kill Goose Rocks, the modeling that they've done. A Category 2 storm will kill goose rocks. FEMA is, I don't know, Werner, perhaps you could tell us exactly where the flood map is at, but most of goose rocks is going into a flood zone where it wasn't before. And much of it's from the rivers, from, it's not the ocean running over the front, it's the tide getting trapped in there. So I think it's a big ecological, mess right now. All is not well in paradise. In the river, we test I do water testing. In the 10-year period, the state's been working with towns to test. We're the 4th worst in the state for the number of days that exceeds the EPA. The town's trying to address it this year. It's doing a little more testing to try to pinpoint the problems. But the rivers are a mess right now. So I think this does violate the comprehensive plan concepts of water quality, protecting marine life. When you put a lawn in, it's a perfect storm. These houses are going to be there someday, one day. But if we get a storm 3 years from now and more houses are in there, it's just going to increase the likelihood that it's going to cause, millions of dollars of property damage to everybody who's got a house there. In New Jersey, where I lived, we used to have, floods are very, very sensitive to me, and I'll admit my bias. I lived in a town where there was never a flood, but a little river that wandered through, and then 20 years of development happened upstream, and guess what? The town houses are worthless, there was just no place for the water to go. Now, if you add a room on it to your house in those towns in New Jersey, you need to keep that water on site. If you build a new house, you need to keep that water on site. You can't push it off your property. You have to find a way. So if people have to bury big cisterns in the back of their property, it wasn't a problem before and it wasn't a requirement, but the reality is flooding in many places is becoming a huge problem.
So I think what your question is what was the definition of the zones, of those areas?
Right.
And so the definition of the transitional zone is it identifies an area between rural and growth. This area characteristically has development that consists of residential, some commercial, and a number of large wetland systems, including Goose Rocks Beach. So that's within the definition of the transitional zone. Now, the rural zone identifies those areas which are not typically serviced by sewer and water. This area characteristically has development that includes residential, conservation, some commercial, agriculture, large tracts of fields and forests. So those are the two definitions I think that are important for this.
So it would seem that Binnacle 1 could be a gray area.
Well,
at this point,
if you read
with
the transition,
wide open fields.
It's an area characteristically that has development. When you look at, whenever you look at the Goose Rocks area, you don't really have commercial in there, but it does consist of residential, number of large wetland areas, and again, it specifically identifies Goose Rocks Beach as, being within that transition area. Now, one could argue whether or not Binnacle is at Goose Rocks Beach. I'm not going to get into the specifics of that, but
The quiet side of Kennebunkport, which is a Arundel.
But I think just as important is the rural definition that says those areas that aren't typically serviced by sewer and water. And that's really the whole crux of this discussion is
Sewer and water.
Is sewer and water, is modifying the map when those characteristics change.
So when sewer and water is put in, that's the major trigger point to becoming transitional. That's my question.
Yeah, I think that's I think
could
that's
be.
that's part of it.
Yeah,
for
the
sure.
sewer is tied towards growth, right? The growth definition includes within the 1,000 feet. And those are all within the comprehensive plan where this was developed. As we moved away from that 48 growth cap to something that would be supported by the comp plan, right? Because if we couldn't support it with the comp plan, then we really truly can't have a cap. You could put a temporary one in place, but you can't have a permanent one. So I think this is called like a rural cap, because you have a process in place to control the growth in rural areas by identifying growth areas within your town. And we identified those areas because of the concern of water quality and so forth as to be near sewer. So we provide the most permits to build in that growth area. And then transitional areas, as what I define, is just an area between that and rural. I mean, we could have gone just with a rural and growth, but it's kind of an area in between that's going to see some growth. Because so you can see it goes out on Log Cabin Road where there's opportunities for growth, opportunities to easily run sewer, right? It's sort of the major routes. And like I mentioned, we didn't make Goose Rocks growth area. That didn't make sense. We weren't trying to drive more growth into the Goose Rocks. But, so I made that transition even though it does have sewer.
Yeah, yeah, because ironically, I think when we looked at those definitions, when you look at the growth, the definition of growth, it says identifies those areas in 2009 that were either serviced by sewer and water or were within 1,000 feet of those services. And, you know, arguably, you know, on that portion of the definition, you know, there's an argument that Goose Rocks and, you know, a lot of the surrounding area would have fit the definition of growth. But, you know, at the time, you know, as Dan was saying, the committee decided that that was not an appropriate designation for that area. You know, that it was more appropriate to have it on the, you know, on the western end of town.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments?
I have a question.
Sure.
My name is Bob Dowling, and I was one of the individuals that bought a lot at Pinnacle Hill. And my question to you, probably, Warner, is when will I be able to get a permit to build a house there?
Well,
Now that I found out it's debatable whether it's in Goose Rocks Beach or not.
right, yeah, well, and that's, you know, I think part of that, you know, depends on the outcome, you know, the outcome of this meeting, you know, tonight, you know,
Okay.
the decision, you know, and the decision of this board.
Okay.
You know, that's certainly part of it, so, you know, if we're able to allocate building permits, you know, so currently we've issued 2 building permits out of the transition number, and, you know, should Pinnacle Hill be, you know, be put into that classification, then, you know, then we could allocate permits from transition to Pinnacle Hill, you know, and, you know, you'd be able, well, depending on, have you filed a growth permit application with us yet?
Yeah, I was under the assumption when I closed it that the permits were available, but I
Okay.
was disabused of that
Yeah.
shortly thereafter.
Yeah, so, yeah, you know, depending on what we have in the queue
see.
there, I mean, and depending on the outcome of this, you know, this
I see.
meeting, you could be eligible for one this year.
This
you know,
year.
Or, you know, or not. So depending on what, you know, depending on the outcome of this, you know, this meeting.
And when would that, would I be in knowledge of that, the outcome of this meeting?
Yeah, well, that as soon as we make that decision this
Yeah.
meeting. We need to clarify what the transitional areas would be, but
I
it's
see.
going to be something that's going to be
Okay.
determined.
Yep.
So the time
Within-
frame would be,
I'm
Well,
not sure I
it's
can
a-
give you one, sir.
It's up to this committee to decide if they want to make a decision on this, you know, on this tonight, or
I
if
see.
they,
Okay.
or if they
Wanna
want
take
to, you know, have further discussion,
I see.
you know, about it at future meetings or not.
I see.
But we'll keep it on the agenda. If we don't decide tonight, we'll leave it on the agenda so that it does get resolved. Because these folks want it resolved, you want it resolved, the developer wants it resolved,
Okay,
so
thank you.
we won't punt it.
So the 8 have been issued for the
No,
rural.
so we've issued 7, you know, at this point, so.
So there's still one available in rural.
There is, yes, that's correct. There's one available, but we have, you know, we have a waiting list.
Have a waiting list.
You know, I
Waiting
don't
list.
know exactly where you're at in that, you know, in that queue,
Okay.
so.
There is one available?
We've issued 7 so far. There is one that's available, but we have a waiting list of applicants that, you know, depending on where they're at in the process and whether we have complete applications or not, so.
Is it more than what's available next year? Is it more than what's available next year for the waiting list? I mean, how's that I don't
Is that
understand.
a carryover?
Does that carry over, or do you have to resubmit? in
No,
another year?
so we carry it, and
Carry
we would
over,
carry it over, yeah.
Okay.
So is there more than 8 on that list right now? or-
No,
All right, so if you didn't get it this year, then you would get it January 1.
Next year.
Yeah,
Right.
but it would, you know, it would lock off the rest of,
Yeah.
you know, that would lock off the rest of, you know, the rural area of town, and you'll wind up with a different crowd in this room then.
That's
Well,
right.
that's true, but,
You know,
That's right.
but
the-
from Bob's standpoint, if he's
you know,
already.
the
put
ones
it-
that'll have been told that,
Yeah.
you know, they can't have any permits, you know, for another year.
Yeah.
That'll be a different conversation.
Warner, how many transitional permits have been issued then?
Two.
Two.
Two so far.
There's quite a few
Mhm.
available then?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, in theory, there's 8, you know, there's.
10,
10.
10.
10 available.
10 that's available, so.
So it really
Yeah, for
just
that
comes,
section.
it just comes down to an issue, it's, you build this year, or you wait till next year, or possibly the third year. The building, if approved, will go on.
Correct, and I
Yeah.
mean, obviously, the choice of the property owner as well.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you know, we see, yeah, I mean, we have subdivisions in town that still have vacant lots, you know, I mean, we have subdivisions that were approved years ago that are not, you know, that are not fully built out, you know. Now, granted, I think, you know, I think this subdivision, it's, you know, because of its location and proximity to the beach, you know, these lots are, you know, the lots are selling fairly quickly. You know, but I can't speak to everybody's individual circumstance as to when they decide
Yeah,
they're going
sure,
to build.
sure.
You know, I mean, that's,
Sure.
you know, that's not something that, you know, we can necessarily predict. You know,
I what?
Wallace Woods as an example, Wallace Woods built that pretty
I
quick.
can-
You know, that was done fairly quick. You know, I can point to numerous other subdivisions that, you know, that have been in existence that still have vacant
That's a
lots
sad
available
story.
in them that, you know, have been in a build-out process for, you know, over 10 years. So,
And I can tell you from previous experience on the board, there's been discussions that, you know, once you get to the point of approval of a subdivision, however number of homes, or is it better for the town, for the neighbors, that it just gets built? You know, within that year, so it's done, or suffer, you know, the construction going on for 5, 10 years as things are built as for permits. I mean, we had a lot of discussion about that, and we chose to stick with the permits.
I mean, that,
But there are folks who would advocate, here, once you've made that decision that you've allowed that subdivision, just get it done. So neighbors don't have to put up with all the banging and construction and all the rest for, you know, year after year after year after year until that lot's completed. So, I mean, there is that benefit.
I mean, that was a big discussion for CDMK, you know, for Old Port Village, you know, that when you're looking at a subdivision that gets approved for over 80 units, you know, do you really want to have a 15-year, you know, build-out scenario? You know, and I think my sense, at least, or the feedback that I got was, you know, was similar to what you just said, Dan, is that, you know, once you go through, once a property owner goes through the approval process, you know, and they've been approved, then generally speaking, you know, the desire is to, you know, get it in, get it done, you know, as opposed to, you know, dragging it out over a long period of time.
And really, I think, Paul, to your comment, again, we're just talking about the speed of things being completed. I mean, all the control of water, whether it should be on-site and off-site, I mean, that's all, you know, governed by either the subdivision reg
No, but
or
if,
our own particular
no, but
ordinances
if
we wanna
we,
change those.
if
Those are all
we,
valid
if we
points.
looked at our ordinances with a more of a view towards sustainability in vulnerable areas, we would, we'd probably make some changes. We might not allow 55 new homes at the campground on septic without growth planning permits. What's the difference between those 55 homes and tiny houses or
Yeah.
small houses at Goose Rocks? None, except those aren't on sewer. So to me, there are lots of gaps. You're allowed to approve a subdivision. Warner, correct me if I'm wrong. You're allowed to have a subdivision and, you know, certain trees are maintained, and the day after I take title to my property, I can clear cut my lot if I'm not in the shoreland zone. And so even though the subdivider under our ordinance is required to measure large trees and try to, you know, preserve them and build around them, and in a you know, area of town that is a that you know, impacts the river so directly, and then we just let them clear cut the day afterwards because they want a big green lawn. And all the benefit of those trees is lost. And, it was fine if there were no flooding problems, but we're going to wipe out goose rocks.
Well, that's a constant conversation with folks down at Goose Rocks anyways. It seems, like there are a fair number of folks at Goose Rocks that are allergic to trees. But I mean, that's, that's
But
a
we don't always
constant-
have to do things the same bad old ways we did it.
No,
We should fix our ordinances.
Understood.
We should react to changing times and changing climate and changing environment down there, and we should fix it before we allow much more. So we might have a chance to do some fixing. We're talking about before building permit is issued for house number 8 or house number 28 on the McCrillis property. That property is huge. We better fix this before.
But wouldn't what you're referring to, these ecological disasters, aren't necessarily just new building permits. Whatever's being proposed to sustain would be everybody that lives down there changing the behavior of even their property that's existing, correct?
Well,
Like in your
it should
example
be
of
like if I build an
sisters, you
addition,
know what I mean?
right, if I build an addition, I shouldn't create a nuisance for my neighbors. Years ago, it wasn't thought about. Years ago, it didn't matter. Now it does matter. When the whole neighborhood is going to be paying ridiculous flood insurance rates, and houses can't be sold unless they have flood insurance. We can't deny that it exists. Werner will tell you, if that tide had been 2 hours different, we would have had a different outcome. We would have had a much worse outcome. So it's just a roll of the dice. And there's how many of these storms between the time we build these 12 houses get built and 15 more and then 40 more. McCrillis is trying to develop that property. I know that from people.
Dan, one last comment would be, if you did approve this, do you just keep leapfrogging and then add towards Route 9? I mean, that seems like that would be.
Honestly, it could, right? I mean, you keep building the sewer out, it allows us to do that,
Exactly.
Does it make sense all the time? I don't know. And that's why you have a board, and we have open meetings, and you have a discussion, and you come to a resolution, and some people are gonna be happy and some people won't be.
Is there a limit
That's
on the sewer?
There is a limit,
Yeah.
there is a limit. I
Yeah,
think
How much?
I think we had 400 dwellings or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, there's, the plant itself does have limits, without upgrades and modifications. And so as part of any sewer extension proposal, the developer, provides us with the proposed design. That design then goes out, we hire a third-party engineering firm where the design flows are calculated from the proposed development all the way through the town's infrastructure. So that flow, gets studied from from point A all the way back to the treatment plant. So, every pump station is looked at, every line is looked at and analyzed for the additional flow to verify that there's capacity. And if it's noted that there's a pump station or a line that doesn't have that capacity, then it really becomes incumbent then upon the developer to deal with the cost of the upgrade of that infrastructure then. So now to this point, the development that we're talking about, Binnacle Hill 1, went through that exact study where the pump stations at Goose Rocks were looked at, were reviewed, were found to have adequate capacity to deal with the additional flow. But that's the process that we use. Whenever there's whenever there's a proposal to put additional units onto the infrastructure, onto the sewer infrastructure.
Pinnacle 2 finished planning yet? I lost track of it.
No, so Binnacle 2, in the beginning of August, that's when the planning board will begin the final plan application. So they went through the preliminary plan application, made some changes, along the road for that. They'll start the final process, like I said, beginning of August. And again, that also goes through the same, it goes through the same review as the first phase did, as far as, the sewer capacity, the pump station, there's a different, there's a different pump station that gets, that gets analyzed, for that particular phase. But, it goes through the same piece. And then that third party, reports back to the town as to whether or not, there's capacity or infrastructure issues, so.
Just out of curiosity, weird question. A storm surge or flood, does that have the ability to penetrate any of the sewer lines or allow
Sure.
leaking or anything?
Mhm.
There? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so when we looked at the numbers, for the development of the comp plan, I don't know if you may not have been, on the group at that point, but, we had Alan Moyer came and kind of gave us a tutorial on, just how the sewer system worked and the capacities. So the sewer department could actually get a pretty good indicator in terms of, what type of storm that we had. In retrospect, so in a couple days afterwards, you actually would see the flow number spike, after a significant rain event. And that's just because you have some natural intrusion that comes into the sewer system. Every manhole that you have, you're going to have a certain amount of, storm water that goes into it, and so that's unavoidable. There is also, some folks, illegally tie in, they'll tie in their perimeter drains or something like that to it as well. So you get, sometimes you get that additional flow that shows up during storm events. But yeah, you can look, you could go to the sewer department and look at the, look at the flow rates. So this storm event, that we had today, 2 days from now, you go to the sewer department, you'll see the
But
spike.
the flow is going towards the plant. What I'm talking about, if a storm surge comes in and floods the area, is there a chance that, it's gonna impact the other way, or it's gonna leave presence of contaminants everywhere?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, storm surges, they move sand, they can.
Yeah,
they
okay.
can cause
No,
all
that's
types
what I
of-
mean.
they cause
I
all
didn't, I don't know
Yeah,
if it was like
you'd have to
a
have
self-contained, or if there's a way to control that, or with an
mean-
upgrade is, not gonna allow that to happen.
Yeah, there could be, you could have some, some element of that. Now, the system does have a fair amount of backflow preventers. In the case of Goose Rocks, a good
Like a
bit.
check valve type,
Yep.
simplistic terms?
Exactly.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, you've got check valves that are built in. All the pump stations down at Goose Rocks all operate. They all have backup generators, or the capacity to have backup generators hooked to them. And a good bit of that is a closed system. That's a forced main. So that's why you have the pump stations. Those all operate on a forced main system, and generally speaking, those are all closed. But your question, and if you had a significant storm event, you could have, you could have some, contamination in your, in your
Talking
flood
about,
waters.
I might as well say it, the dirty word, like, is somebody gonna have poop on their lawn? You
Yeah.
know what I mean?
Yeah.
Is
Well, I
there
mean,
a chance of that,
localized, you got localized,
Okay.
right? Risk of localized.
Yeah.
But I mean, the beach
So
area is
beats what we
fairly
have.
protected, I would think, from the islands
Yep.
around it, so. I mean, I'm not a hydrologist or.
But yeah, the
Yeah.
pump
I
stations.
mean, I'm just going based on, what you're saying is there a way, like, if we look at that in the future, if we are gonna grow,
Well-
can we are there ways to contain that sewer from preventing that from happening? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's one thing about somebody's unloading their washer on a pipe into their lawn and down in the drain. We can, that's one thing we can figure out and penalize or get rid of, but, I do kinda have a concern. I don't wanna see the sewer completely
Where have-
contaminate the area.
Have the pump stations been analyzed for sustainability? Like the ocean and the marsh breached many places
Yeah.
in March.
Yeah.
Just to the east of me, it breached.
Yeah. I
Oh,
know the
across
sewer
Kings
department-
Highway.
The sewer department is actually looking at, doing a sustainability analysis of, of the infrastructure, of the sewer infrastructure. That was that was a consideration that was given when we, for the recent pump station upgrades that were done. You know, the Green Street and Ocean Avenue pump stations, you know, both of those were designed, you know, with flooding in consideration.
Right.
You know, to the point where all, the major controls and everything were elevated. I mean, it is it's a sewer pump station, so, I mean, to some extent, it's designed to run underwater. You know, the pumps are designed to do that, but consideration was given for those pump station when they were replaced. They were designed to be in the flood zone. You know, and that would be the case. That would be the case for any pump station that gets replaced within the flood zone.
Thanks.
Any other comments or questions on this topic?
I have a question.
Sure.
What's the process of deciding when and where the sewer and water is expanded?
Yeah.
I'll let Warner take that one.
What's it?
Well, yeah, it's a
good
good question. So there's two drivers, you know, behind it. You know, one, you could have a private developer propose a sewer extension, or the town could propose a sewer extension. So if you look within the comp plan, we actually went through and we identified, you know, on the municipal side of it, like if we were to do sewer extensions, you know, what would be the most, you know, which ones would we do first? And we kind of went through a prioritization. But it's either brought on by the town or it's brought on by, you know, by a private developer. So in the case of Binnacle, you know, Bally proposed the sewer extension in New Biddeford Road. Had to go through a town meeting process to get that approved. So it literally went to a raise of the hand vote, you know, to allow for that sewer extension to happen in New Biddeford.
It was like 15 people here. I remember being here.
So, yeah, that was town meeting. That was a town meeting last year where we're consolidated. Yep.
Oh.
Yep. Where that vote happened. Where the town voted
Oh, thinking of the one that was here.
voted to
We had a
accept
vote.
it.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, and then in that case, you know, where it was his proposal, you know, I mean, he bore the cost of the main extension. So now because there were existing homes that were also on that extension, the town did enter into an agreement where the town financed the stubs for all the existing homes that are there. You know, so now, you know, the good piece of that was that with that sewer extension, you know, now, you know, all of the homes that are located on New Biddeford Road that aren't on sewer now have access to sewer. And so, you know, a lot of those that, you know, we've got a fair number, well, all of them that are on the marsh side of New Biddeford Road, which I think is probably more of the concern, are now able to tie into the sewer. Now, had the developer not proposed the sewer extension, you know, I can't tell you when the town would have actually financed, you know, a sewer extension to do that piece. So,
How far does that sewer extension go up? Does it go up or come down from 9?
it comes up from it came up New Biddeford. Well, depending where you're standing, I guess. You know, it came from the bridge. You know,
Okay.
so it came from the Kings Highway direction.
Okay. And all the way up to, what, halfway up, or?
Well, it came to the entrance. You know, came to the entrance.
To the road.
Yeah,
To the road.
to the
Driveway in.
Yeah, to the entrance of Binnacle Hill. Yeah.
Okay.
Even though there's a house just beyond that, there was provisions made to pick up that last house because it was so close. You know, yeah, so they did make provisions so that there was a tie-in for that last house.
Okay.
That's a good thing.
So that puts a lot of that land within 1,000 feet of sewer.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Now, you know, I will say one thing, I know there's been conversation about that particular sewer, line. So when that line was sized, so the developer was not under the obligation to size that line for potential future development. So that line, because it's a force main, and so he's obligated to design it based on his proposal and the existing development that it went by. So it was only reviewed for that capacity. And what's important to know with forced mains is that it's not good to oversize a force main. If you have too large of a diameter, the whole thing operates under pressure, and so really the smaller that diameter, is what creates the velocity, for the flow. Not the case so with a gravity line. With a gravity line, you have a lot of you have significantly more capacity. So. So that extension as it comes up there, was not reviewed and designed, for necessarily for another, 40, 50 homes, to be tied into that. So now, I'm not an engineer. I can't tell you, what additional capacities are in that line. But if you had future development further up the road, it would have to go through the same process, if it wanted to tie into that, force main. So, and let's say for argument's sake that force main wasn't big enough. That point, they'd have to make a choice as to whether or not they wanted to dig all of that up and replace it with a larger force main. And again, that being in the public, right of way would have to go through, a public process. There would have to be another town meeting approval to do that extension. So, it's not a decision that happens in a vacuum.
If I may, here you say something which illustrates a little bit of the role that I think maybe Paul is going to play here of having the growth planning committee effectively planning those things, because as opposed to just seeing where the line's going to end up and then calling everything that's within a certain distance a growth or a transitional area, the idea would be more to see where we want to have growth, and design, for example, that plan that you're talking about could have been designed with the idea that the whole of Biddeford would, if it was designed that way, the whole of Biddeford would be covered by this. As opposed to here, we just keep going piecemeal, keep growing in that fashion. And that is not really planning, this is just going in another way.
No, I don't disagree with that piece of it at all. I mean, that makes absolute perfect sense. In a perfect world, that's exactly what we would do. We would do those types of things. And God bless Charlie Reed. He would have advocated for that all day long. But the practical reality of it is that in this situation with a force main, it's difficult to speculate in terms of just how much capacity you would require somebody to upsize all that infrastructure by. An example of where we deal with that here in town, you're getting more education on sewer than you probably want, but the pump station at Turbot's Creek was, for those of you who've been around for a while, the Shaman Inn, was located down off the Turbot's Creek area. And that pump station, down there at the time was sized for the capacity of the Shaman, and so, that's one massive pump station that's down there. And the town consistently has maintenance issues with that, because it just doesn't get enough flow. Ironically, that pump station would operate better if we got more flow going through it.
Let's stop there, Werner.
But that's just the reality. Is that it was designed for something that went away, and is not going to happen in that area. So, but I agree with you completely. The idea that we would plan the infrastructure and say, hey, look, if we think there's X number, the potential for X number of houses or new development, why not size the infrastructure to, to accommodate for that? It makes perfect sense.
But difficult to do, right? Because you're relying on the market, you're relying on people, what their desires are to do with the land. We're not a socialist town that decides how things are going to be built and when and who, right? So we try to be nimble, as someone said, in how we do things, but at the same time, and be fair to all homeowners and all property owners. So it's a balance. And I guess at the end of the day, if we don't make anybody real mad or real happy, then we've probably done our job okay. So,
Hey, that's my line.
sorry. And we advocated for a long time just to get Werner to have at least half a planning position. Because when we
Yeah.
first started going through this, we just had code enforcement. So
Right.
we didn't even have planning. And so
We're getting there.
we're getting there. Okay. Any other discussion? Okay. What's the board's, what would you like to do with this topic? I personally would like to think about it and come back to it next meeting and make a decision as to where we go. But that's just my opinion, that,
Yeah, well, I think at a minimum, we should have public notice of it. If this Lisa Miller's email is correct, then it wasn't even on the calendar. And the agenda item that I got just said review of the growth plan, that I do think the people at Goose Rocks, there should be a public notice
Yeah.
that this,
Well,
that this,
yeah.
that this is being contemplated.
it should be throughout the whole town, though.
Next.
Yeah, no, I
Yeah, the whole
understand.
town.
But there's a specific,
And I
there's a
think,
specific proposal,
There's a-
as opposed to
well-
reviewing the entire map.
Right.
There's one proposal
I'm interested in
affecting,
looking at the map in general. And
what's the second proposal?
Isn't it Burl? Aren't there basically two? Isn't Burl one and Pinnacle two?
No, so Mills Road, so the Mills Road subdivision is already in the transition area.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
So,
Right. But as part of looking at that, I think we ought to just make sure we take a look at I don't want to do maps every 3 months. So looked at it and make sure that we have the right transition rule
Okay.
currently. So that we do it once and then it's off the table for a while.
okay.
Okay.
No,
So let's put this on the agenda for next meeting. You guys all know, next meeting. And we can set that right now so you don't have to stay and listen to the rest of our spiel for a half hour.
And can we describe it in the agenda so this specific
Yes.
proposal is identified as opposed to just a review of the map? Thank you.
So we'll be in August.
Oh, calendars.
August 7th is the first.
August 7th works for me.
What was the other date you said?
Well, 7th and the 21st are their
21st,
usual
okay.
two
All right,
meeting dates,
dates.
so
Yeah.
I'm actually not traveling either one, so I'm available
I
both.
would prefer the 21st.
21st?
I have some commitments on the 7th, but if everybody else can do it.
Mr. Fitz?
I'm okay with either.
21 ago?
21 works.
Okay, 21.
Thanks.
Got it.
Appreciate it.
Choose 21, you'll be without me for that one.
Oh,
So,
we don't want to do that.
I want to do that.
well, that's that.
It's going to happen sooner or
that's
later.
that
We'll
s-
have
that's
to
that
come off our training wheels.
Oh,
That's right. That's that, well, it's that sweet spot for, before school starts. and-
Yeah,
oh, right.
I got you.
Happy vacation.
Yeah.
Right.
All right, it's 21st. So we'll be here on August 21st and we'll render a decision. Be our goal anyways, unless something else pops up.
Abby, are you good on the 21st? Are you coming? Okay,
Yeah.
great.
So Abby will be here. She'll be sitting in that seat taking all the.
You can stay. We didn't mean to kick you out.
Yeah, you don't have to leave, but I'm.
It's been very educational.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for coming. I appreciate the interest. Okay. Next agenda item, which I believe Abby had for us. Surveys, is that it?
Yes. Update on survey.
Update on survey.
So based on our discussion discussion at the last meeting and all the revisions, suggested revisions to each of the questions, I went and created a new survey in SurveyMonkey, which is the web-based survey administration tool.
Okay.
Put that together. And so there are just really a few questions I think we need to discuss where we changed the wording and where
Okay.
we left it up to sort of open-ended as to how certain questions are going to be worded. So I'll pass these out. So this first one, the stapled packet, is the actual survey, draft survey with questions, and then this accompanying one-pager document is alternative wording for question number 7.
Okay.
It's a very interesting conversation. I have to bring popcorn.
Yeah. Sorry.
Oh, I guess these are more, I can do this.
Thanks.
First question.
Yeah, there you go.
So the first 3 questions are new, and that's just to provide some baseline information about the respondents in the hopes that we will be able to make the other information and responses more helpful for you all. And so if we turn to question 7, which is I think
Abby, could you just turn that mic up a little bit toward?
tilt it up?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No?
There you go.
Second.
All right.
Okay. So question 7, we had a conversation last time about the fact that some people in town perceive the community and the character of the town to be changing, and perhaps changing for the worst. And so we talked about framing a question that would get at not just changes within the community, but changes based on the specific areas of the community. So question 7, as it's listed in the SurveyMonkey packet document, sort of uses similar wording as was used in the previous community survey.
Okay.
And then question 7 wording on the standalone one-page document is essentially getting at the same piece of information, but sort of describes the characteristics of each of the areas within the community as they are described in the comp plan.
And are you suggesting we might put the whole,
7 in there.
the whole 7 in there with all the descriptions so people know what Dock Square is or Goose
That
Rocks?
is- Yeah, that is what I would like to get feedback on, specifically
Yeah.
for this question, is how, would providing this a description of the characteristics of each area within town, do you think that would be helpful for folks who are responding to the survey and provide you all with more informed responses?
Could you do that as the last question instead of the 7th question? So that it wouldn't make the thing look that much bigger?
Yeah, so to deter people from.
Yeah, because whenever
Yeah.
you, if you're racing through something and all of a sudden you get stopped by a long slog, a certain percentage of your people will just tune off.
Throw it away.
So if you have to read something
So,
and just not fly through it.
so the question 3, asking what neighborhood you reside in, is directly relevant to 7 then, right?
Yes.
Oh,
Okay,
yeah.
that's good. Should we add any other areas? Should we add
Should probably put
like
a
a rural
rural,
or-
yeah,
I
some
don't
kind of a
know.
rural
rural,
designation in
which
there.
would kind of capture the farm and forest,
Me,
Yep,
Jim specifically?
right,
put Jim there.
yeah.
Yeah.
You live close to
Jim's
Jim.
area.
Jim's
Jim's
area.
rural area.
That way too.
Yeah.
Jim and Mike's rural
Jim
area.
Mike's rural area.
Would you consider that a neighborhood?
It's true.
Someone who lives on,
Yeah, but they'll.
Arundel
feel- they don't wanna
Road
feel-
or-
Have people feel left out.
yeah, no, I
Right? You
understand.
go through there and go, I'm not one of those, like you just said, right? Throw it in the trash.
I mean, you could just call it area.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking,
You know,
instead of calling it a
We'll call it area,
neighborhood.
but I think you still
Which
wanna
section of
have-
town do you live in, or which,
Yeah.
Because I don't live in any of those sections.
you're going to stop right there.
I'm gonna stop right there, right? So I think if we put it a rural, I think that'll capture the rest of us.
Okay, to question 3 and
Question 7, yeah, and then just have a definition. You live in town, but you're not in one of those other ones. You live
Okay.
in-
Do you have proposed language for the description for that? Because that was not
Everything else.
comp plan, all other areas.
Everything but a-
Anything that's not on one of the others.
Is it defined in
It's probably
I mean, I
defined
think
in
if
our
you
the
put,
comp plan?
you know,
comp plan
rural,
somewhere under-
you know, a rural area.
a rural,
I would think so.
Yeah,
yeah.
and that's, yeah, probably. It's
Rear and bars.
Is the lot, is the lot size larger in all of the rural area?
No, free enterprise is
No.
different
Okay.
than
But I
farm and forest.
still maintain that there are very many people who live out, I would say rural, because you just, until
Yeah.
the commercial entity is built, they don't know they're in farm and forest. or free
exactly, I know,
enterprise.
exactly.
Right.
That's,
But-
at
rural.
least that was my experience on the planning
They'll
board.
know when they look at it, I'm not Cape Arundel, I'm not Cape
Right.
Arundel,
Yes,
I'm not Dexter, I'm
exactly.
not-
They'll know
I'm
where
in
they
rural.
don't
Yeah,
don't
I know
live,
where
but
that-
they
So
don't
then they
know
can at
where
least
they do
respond.
live.
Because I don't want, I mean, from other, I'm not sure what we would,
So would, if we were going to include these descriptions, would we want 3 and 7 to be next to each other in the back? Or do you think, I don't need a definition, I guess I don't need a definition to know what Goose Rocks is if I live at Goose Rocks, probably, but I might not know what riverfront area is if I live at Goose Rocks, right? So maybe you don't need the definitions by 3.
Do folks think those questions should follow each other, or is 3 okay where it is? And move 7 to the end, so as not to scare people.
I don't think it matters.
I almost,
I don't
I mean,
think
it's
so.
like demographic information, I almost
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
that 3
Yes.
stays
Yeah, which
where it
kind of
is.
belongs together
Yeah.
up front.
yeah,
No, I
I'd be
mean-
right with that.
How
Other
much would it
/ rural, or please specify, if I saw other / rural, I would probably tag that and say Goose Rocks Road. You know what I mean? That's what I would.
Yeah, I think you
put.
just put rural.
Right, and I did try to organize all of the questions based on sort of what topic or theme.
Good.
Okay.
What a great idea.
Thank
So
you.
it should sort of flow logically that way. And then question,
I mean, does it make sense? I mean, rural is still a big area.
Yeah.
Do we want to know where the people that are filling this out actually are in that rural area? Does it, do we want that information? Because like I said, if I'm gonna choose other and I say Goose Rocks Road, does that give us information that's valid or significant to anything? As opposed to saying, we're just gonna blanket all these people as rural, you know? I don't know if it's,
Well, if there was a high correlation of, you know, you could correlate people in the rural areas saying the rural area is changing detrimentally, and that may be different than the rest of the town. We may not see it or think it's changing. So having rural identified, I think, is important. I don't know that it's that important to further break that down.
No.
No.
I think it-
I don't know any other logical way you would, there's no
Yeah.
big road that dissects it, or,
I mean, I think you'll see the results, you know, if
Yes.
somebody specifies other in there, you'll get a sense of, I mean,
Yeah,
you
we'll
know,
probably
if
end up
folks decide
combining.
to, you know, write in a description.
Right.
Yeah.
You could put just 2 or 3 of the roads, you know, like the Goose Rocks Road area.
Well, if they put
Or
other in,
something.
if they put other in right in that little box, we're gonna know.
right.
Yeah.
If they want to
Yeah.
further define
Jim
themselves.
can put down Goose Rocks Road.
the other option.
but does it make sense to get rid of I don't know then?
And
Because
Oh.
force them to say other and choose it instead of I don't know gives us nothing. It gives
No,
us
I-
invalid data.
No.
well, other, we've got other
No,
on.
I
Yeah.
know, but like, does an I don't know? I'd rather have people forced to say other instead of I don't know, and maybe they'll fill out where
Well,
they actually live. I don't know.
We
Yeah,
have
but if
to
you're-
back, I don't know, then we got another issue we have to
Well, you work on.
But if you're like between Goose Rocks and Cape Porpoise along Mills Road, there are people who probably live along there who don't know what to, who wouldn't know what to put.
Sure.
So it's, I don't know.
Yeah.
And
That's okay, I think we'll capture some information, and it'll tell us we have to do some more education.
I
Tank
would
Town.
say if they put I don't know, it's probably rural.
Yeah,
Come on.
well,
I think you're denigrating the rural
Another
folks.
option is SurveyMonkey does allow you to incorporate images and graphs and maps in the questions that
Oh,
you're
okay.
asking, so if it would be helpful, if there's an existing map
Oh, that'd be,
delineating these areas in town, we can throw that in.
oh, okay,
to guide.
that'd be neat. Then if you pick I don't know, then you really,
At least they can go
Yeah,
like
now
this.
you're really confused.
okay.
Yeah.
I'm in that area.
Okay. And then question 8, which is the first question on page 3, which is hidden by the staple, I think. As we discussed at the last meeting, we reframed some of the questions that had been asked in the prior survey to ask how important those issues were to people. So just reframing how those questions were
Good.
worded. Are folks okay with what's listed here? Are there issues that
following issues?
we're missing, or maybe ones that are listed that don't need to be included?
I think that's right on.
I do too.
Do you want to add the school? Do you want to add the school?
That might be a good idea.
Yeah.
What would you say?
Like, you mean like viability of the school, like that to try.
Or
to
just
close it?
having one. Right, and there was
The schools.
There was a,
I mean,
there was a
we
question.
say parking, so it's not,
Yeah,
Yeah.
I will
it's a big
there-
broad.
yeah, so,
Just to point out, there are 2 questions about the school.
well, there are.
Okay.
21 and 22, but if
Oh.
it would be
No,
more
that's okay.
appropriate in this question.
Oh, you're right.
Okay, no, that's
Elementary,
fine, that's
No,
good.
that's
Yeah.
fine.
We asked it later, that's fine.
Yep.
Good, thank you. Under traffic, should we be more specific on traffic, or is it acceptable to say, obviously, people are gonna think automotive traffic and buses and stuff, and not anything else? Okay, good.
What about property taxes?
Like lowering property taxes?
Yeah, but that's a good question.
Question 6, one of the items that folks are being asked to rate the level of importance of is
We say low
taxes.
taxes.
So we could move that topic to question 8 or reword it.
No, I think it's good
No, it
there.
fits
It's
in.
fine there.
It's fine, man.
So what does that say to me when I see low taxes? There are a lot of people who are in my neighborhood who would say they have very high taxes.
Then they should move to Bedford Pool.
No, they're even higher.
That's right.
So the wording in the.
No, so I'm just, is
Well,
this what we
What
asked?
we're saying is how important are low taxes,
Yeah, that's right.
which means how much service is the town willing to provide?
Yeah, so do we wanna get to a question about that then? You know,
That could be.
You know, do you feel you're getting the service for your tax money, or something to that extent?
Or the level, or the rate of how much is budgeted tax-wise, which really impacts how much our taxes are gonna be.
And I'm trying to, we definitely should ask the question. I'm just trying to be as objective and as non-judgmental about the language. Like what, I don't know when I see low taxes, of course, everybody would say,
Yeah, so,
but it doesn't tell you
Yeah,
whether
but-
people think the taxes in town are low, medium, high.
I think you'd have to ask that specific question, you know, I mean,
Do you
do you
feel,
feel your taxes are,
low,
you
medium,
know,
high.
right?
Should we add
And
that as
again,
a question?
I don't know necessarily what you do with that, you know,
Yeah.
in terms of,
Well, it will
I
be-
think it ties into like, if they say they're from a particular area and they think their taxes are
True.
high,
right,
you
yeah,
get,
if you
you
can
get
correlate it to
you
the.
get to correlate that.
Yeah, I mean, it will be interesting, it would be interesting to see how this goes
So
over
should we-
time
Yeah.
with all second house property owners losing tax deduction, capping of real estate taxes to, what's the number? I don't,
Yeah.
10,000, what's the,
Right.
10.
what's it?
It's 10.
It's 10, yeah, so if you own 2 homes, one in Massachusetts, one in, all of a sudden, your tax deduction may be reduced by, you know, so all of a sudden, taxes may seem very high
Yes.
to someone who loses the tax deduction.
Which is really good information. I'm not sure what we can do with that.
Well, I
You
just
know,
think over time,
Yeah,
when the question is asked again,
you could forward it on to Washington.
So
Yeah, this is the trend we're seeing. People aren't happy with their taxes.
Are folks interested in finding out if people just think their taxes are either low, moderate, or high, or if they are low, moderate, or high in relation to the services that the town is providing?
Well, yeah,
I think that would be,
I think that would be good.
what did we
To
ask
the
last
value.
time? Do you-
Low,
Last
medium,
time-
high to the value.
We just said low taxes, right?
Low tax rate.
Low
So
tax
we
rate.
changed the wording, we got rid of rate.
Right.
I like rate. Like,
So don't we make that, so low taxes, or taxes versus the value you receive,
Okay,
you know, something to that extent. I'll let you wordsmith it, so.
okay. All right, and question 9 is also new, but same issues as question 8. It just asks folks to rank how important they think those issues are for the town over the next 5 years.
That's a good one.
Okay.
how are they gonna do, in the Survey Monkey, how is this gonna, if I'm looking at this, how do I rank this?
1, 2, 3, 4.
Like, is it- it'll
It's sort of like
choose,
drag and drop, it has to be ranked
Okay.
as a priority
so
list.
it'll go in order, okay,
Yep.
got it.
Yep. And then 10 and 11 are just,
I like 10.
So, but we may also have to do paper copies on this, right? So for that, we may have to have them rank it 1 through 6, right?
yeah,
With one,
they would just write in, yeah.
yeah,
So we
write it
would-
in, so we'd have to put in,
For the
you know,
paper copies, I can add
add
descriptions,
the highest.
instructions for
Yeah,
questions
okay,
like that.
good,
Yeah.
good.
Good.
Yes, we should. I think 10 is,
Count 10.
10's a good one.
Timely, 10's
10
timely.
definitely, keep 10.
Any discussion about number 11? That one is a carryover from the previous survey.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, and then 12, which
Another
is the
timely.
topic of earlier discussion. Talking about the growth permit.
Got it.
Now we're talking about-
And asking if folks think that the town should continue to limit the number of new residential dwelling units.
Yeah, I think it'd be good to actually add growth permit into that text somehow,
That
so it
language.
ties that, that's what it is. That's what that growth permit means.
So has an ordinance
There's an ordinance.
that establishes growth permits or something like that?
Okay.
I would just say Kennebunkport
Yeah,
has a
like,
growth
and maybe you just
planning
put in
ordinance.
that it's also known as a growth permit.
or growth
Okay.
permit.
Could that,
Some people don't know what a growth permit is.
Right.
Right.
yeah,
I don't think the
So it's an opportunity to
term,
do a little education,
Yeah.
right?
it is.
Okay, should more information be added to this question, like the number of permits are available each year? And
No.
Yeah.
Things
No.
like that change,
Yeah.
okay,
No.
alright.
I think the way you've said it describes it very well, the first sentence.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't have any jargon, it doesn't have any
No.
knowledge that you
The
need to
maximum
know.
number of new dwellings, yeah.
So
Okay.
I don't know that I
Just
would
add
put
the-
growth,
Yeah.
Just-
put our ordinance into it. Yeah, I mean, you know, confuse it by, this is very simple.
Yeah.
Confuse
Yeah,
it by
it's simple,
adding,
but I wanted to use that as an opportunity to educate. that
Right.
That's what a growth permit is.
Yeah, it's a matter of educating, like, most people think like, oh, I wanna go get a building permit. Well,
Right.
it's called a growth permit.
First.
You know, we wanna educate.
well, there's 2 permits you
There's
need.
2 much.
Yeah,
You gotta
yeah,
get that,
yeah.
then
You need a building
but
permit and
to
you need a growth
educate them
permit.
on-
Yeah,
Or you can just put like otherwise known as a growth permit or something like that. I think it's well described, I just don't want to tie it to the growth permit.
13 and 14 are somewhat new modifications of prior questions, but
They look good.
there was conversation last time about what language should be used describing senior citizen population. I'm wondering if senior citizens is okay for this survey.
Seniors?
Mhm.
Is seniors the more generic term these days than senior citizens?
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it?
I don't know. I'm not there yet, I don't know.
Oh, I know.
I'm not saying anyone on this board.
I don't know.
We'd have to
They're
go and ask.
citizen, it's, I mean, I don't think anybody's gonna be offended, I don't
No.
know.
Well, what do we call the committee? What was that? It was a senior, what was
Senior-
that? Senior advisory committee?
Yeah, it didn't say senior
So, yeah,
citizen.
just say
We
senior.
have a senior center, we
Senior.
have, yeah, let's just go with senior.
In real estate, it's the senior.
Senior is what, older
Real
than-
estate specialist.
Just old
Uh-huh.
people.
It's not the senior citizen.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, there's no, yeah, we're losing our citizenship in this country.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not like we got a
There are
category
others
for
doing that.
junior citizens.
Okay, 15 is also a new question.
Yeah.
Are you sure you wanna leave it as affordable housing, or do you wanna, I hate to mention that, but,
Workforce. Bingo.
Let's stick with
well,
affordable.
you know what, you know how people react to the word affordable.
Affordable. In the,
So what,
No more,
what
no
we're
differently than they
thinking
react
of
to the
is.
word.
we say housing for young families
Young
in
families,
the,
yes.
but that doesn't, that doesn't,
Yeah, you don't wanna
Doesn't
get
help,
into
but
a
it doesn't-
housing discrimination discussion.
Right.
Because you're identifying a demographic.
Right.
About to construct housing less than $300,000.
There is a lack of reasonably,
number on it.
reasonably priced housing.
Or, I mean, you
Kennebunk?
could
No,
just, you could do it
it's
as
reasonable for the
Yeah.
area. It's
affordable,
just not affordable.
Yeah, all right.
affordable
Oh,
slash
Yeah,
workforce.
sorry I brought it up.
Yeah. keep-
No, we discussed this
We discussed
2
it.
years ago when we tried to
We
come up with a better
workforce
word.
and that
Yeah.
backfired.
Right.
Yeah, right.
Workforce?
Okay,
So, we'll stick with affordable.
Go with affordable.
Yep.
let's see what I come up with.
Yeah,
Okay, all right, we'll stick with affordable.
we'll stick with affordable.
Okay, 16 is also a carryover from
I think it's a good
the
one.
prior survey, as is 17. And 18.
Yep.
And then 21 is, these other questions are sort of just carryovers from the previous survey. 21 has been reworded,
Yep.
There you go.
and it goes along with 22.
Good.
Is the language used in those questions
That's
Yep.
gonna be
appropriate?
In 19, was that the same language as before? I know we talked about the user fees once before, but what's confusing me is to cover the cost of additional services and facilities. I get hung up on what that means. We know what user fees is.
I think the word additional is confusing.
Yeah, that's what's confusing me.
Yeah, we shouldn't be finding more services, and, I mean,
Just to
we
cover
should
the
be going
cost
out our way
of-
to find
Strike
other things to
additional.
pay for.
Just,
Yeah.
yeah, I think if you strike
Like the
additional.
cost of services and.
What
Yeah.
question are you on?
19.
19.
Not,
Yeah.
thanks, George.
But do we need to say should expand? Because obviously there's been a great period of expansion of user fees over a period of years. And now it's widely accepted that, I believe, that there are going to be user fees for people who do things ought to pay for them as opposed to the whole taxpayer base. So again, I would say, well, what are they thinking about now when you say should expand?
Yeah.
Because should continue to use, should continue the practice?
Continue the use?
I would try to get rid of one of the uses because you get tied up, use of user fees.
Well, you could just say the
Continue user
town,
fees.
the town should expand expand
User fees.
user fees.
No, but why are we asking that question, is what my question is. What are we thinking about?
Was that a carryover?
That was a carryover.
Yeah.
That was a carryover question.
But what are we expanding? We already have. Is it
But
more than-
aren't like building
Should continue to look at.
aren't permit fees a lot higher now than they were 10 or 15 years ago relative to try to cover the costs of department? And when you think about the fees,
right,
you think
yeah.
about what staff you need, and,
I mean, I can only speak for my department where we
Right.
did that, where we kind of did an analysis of kind of, the costs of the department versus what we took in for income,
Right.
for permit fees. And, purposefully, made a switch so that, more of, that we were bringing in, more on the user fee side of it than was being,
right, and the rec department has done the same
than was
thing.
being allocated, to the taxpayer through property tax. So, yeah, I mean, the same, you'd have the same argument for increasing,
Sewer,
sewer, as well.
Right.
So what's wrong? What's wrong with just saying the town should continue user fees? Building permits, beach stickers,
Yeah.
park?
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
all you need.
that's it.
that would be simple.
And take out the word additional.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and take out additional,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think we just, let's take an addition.
Okay. Any feedback on 21 or 22 questions about the school?
No, I think those are good. One, how important it is and high quality. I don't know, do we need 23? We keep saying yes and then we never fund it. So.
Isn't that the truth?
Well, there are regional transportation alternatives already, we just don't use them.
Right.
Yeah. Well, then let's leave it, see if
Yeah, see what
we're
people
really
say.
enthused about it.
Yeah.
Have we been asked to fund things and have refused to fund things?
Oh, year
Yeah.
after year.
Yeah, the bus goes
Yes.
around.
Oh, the bus
You're
from
down.
the,
Yeah.
Yeah.
okay.
Any feedback on 24, 25, or 26? Those are also carryovers, except for 26, we added shell fishing.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Okay. 27 is sort of a combination of several different questions that were asked in the prior survey.
Here's your question right there.
There you go.
You should ban fertilizer.
Well, that's because of the red tide. If you're in the watershed, if you're in the Goose Rock zone.
Ban, just ban it.
And then 28, the values there, the 3% and approximately $300,000, those were taken from questions from the previous survey. Are those values still appropriate to use?
I'm sorry, could you ask that again?
Yep, in question number 28.
Yes.
The values of 3% and $300,000 were taken from a question from the prior survey. And I'm wondering if those values are still appropriate to use for this survey.
I'd say probably not. I'd say that number,
Be higher now, right?
I mean, I
3%
don't-
would be higher.
yeah, I mean, that, if you were saying 3%, well, 3% of what? Um,
But 3% of the town budget. would
Yeah,
be-
I think that, I'd almost think about striking everything that was in parentheses there. But,
Okay. Do others agree with that, removing the wording that's in the parentheses?
I mean, I don't mind having numbers in there just to make people think about, am I willing to set aside $500,000 a year in our budget for, or 300,000 or 200,000, just to
as a taxpayer, I'd want a number because I may say,
Right.
no.
Or you could pull the
I'm
percentage
not,
out.
not okay with my tax money
Yeah.
You
going
could
to
pull-
pay for public
You could
land.
pull
Pull the
the
3%
percentage
and
out.
say
Pull
3.
percentage
So
out.
get rid of the percent.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
could pull the percentage.
Okay.
Were these the numbers that were used originally?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And the town budget probably doubled in that time?
Yeah, I would say at least. So I'd maybe put 500,000.
No, I'm just
I
saying,
mean, just for a number. I mean, $300,000 is not gonna, you could save it for 3 years, you might be able to buy a parcel of land somewhere, right?
Maybe.
yeah, or you could bond it.
Or
You could
just,
borrow
I mean,
it.
does it say, or
Yeah,
just
yeah.
take out the 300,000, say, or
The quiet
an
side.
approximate dollar
We're
value
gonna
to
expand
be
the town.
determined?
Right next to the
Yes,
town.
that's
We
just
can't really put a
expand
number on it,
the-
or would it make sense to say that?
What's that? I'm sorry.
Or say 3% or approximately a dollar value to be determined at the time?
No.
Well, I mean,
No,
it
no.
would be, it's just throwing a, I think a
Number.
number out there.
Yeah,
It's just a concept that you,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think pulling the percentage out makes sense, because then it's, it's 3% of what, are you
Yeah.
dealing with a town-wide budget, or are you dealing with?
Either you put in
departments, or-
1%.
and no one knows
1% of the
except
town
Barbara
budget.
what the town budget is.
Right,
I like that better.
Should set
Why don't we do that? Why don't we
aside,
put 1% of the town budget or something?
okay.
Yeah, because then it's
1%?
1%.
1% of town.
How much is the town budget?
I have no
Okay,
idea,
we
but
can-
1% of it for,
Who knows?
It's always easy when you spend
I tell you, it's less than Kennebunk.
Yes.
The town budget
I
is
would
less than
put that right
Kennebunk.
in there. 1%,
And Biddeford.
I just don't.
$300,000, which is a lot less than Kenny.
It's getting late.
I forget
Yeah,
what
we-
I hear.
I had a question I wanted to
Okay.
add, but I forgot, so
Oh,
we'll just
now's
keep
the
going.
time.
Punch drunk.
Yeah, I know it. Must be getting near
Any
senior.
feedback on 29 or 30? Those are also,
I think that's
Carryovers.
fine.
Yes.
for the most part.
30,
Open space.
31 is based on a question that was in the prior survey, but specified that resident access to the water.
We added that, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
That's in the comprehensive plan.
Oh, that's a cheap shot.
And then 32 is
Tourists
new.
can't use
yep, that's what I was thinking, I was
Actually,
hoping there was one
all the
there, so,
rest are new.
good.
Yep.
I forgot I think we need that one for sure.
And then one thing, and it was in my notes from last time, but I'm not sure that I asked it, so I apologize if this is a repeat question. But I don't know if you want to include any questions about regulating medical marijuana or anything related to that.
Oh, that's interesting.
Good question.
I think that, the selectmen voted on that, I can't remember what they did, we chose not to, well, that was more of a question of,
Yeah, but the question is, do you want to know what people think?
Yes,
Yeah,
there you
yeah.
go.
Yeah, so,
We know what the board of selectmen,
well, I was there, as a taxpayer, I expressed how I felt, so.
well.
And that was more like the ability to allow it to be used in, social clubs and all those.
Right, well, that's the recreational side of it, town has established, the prohibition on the recreational component, so I think, Abby, you're referring to the, kind of the new pieces that we're dealing with on the medical side of it, so. So, at the last selectmen's meeting, I brought forward some proposed language for a temporary moratorium on medical storefronts. So what's occurring in a lot of other municipalities now is that so caregivers essentially have the ability to provide medical marijuana for up to 5 patients, and so but what many of them practice is they practice this. They have a practice where they have a rotating patient, so the 5th patient is a rotating patient. So the theory is that, that you have a storefront where you sell your medical marijuana, and individual walks in the door, they become your patient for the duration of the sale. And when they walk out the door, they're no longer your patient. Next person walks in, they become your patient, and back and forth, back and forth. So, so you know, so for municipalities, you know, I would say, you know, I think municipalities pretty clearly see that as a circumvention of what was really intended for the caregiver, you know, the caregiver laws. What we've, you know, put in front of the Board of Selectmen is a suggestion for a moratorium to at least, you know, have a chance to have a discussion about it and make a determination as to whether or not we want to have that, whether or not we want to allow for medical marijuana storefronts.
Would that be considered a high quality store downtown? Just curious. Just being sarcastic there.
Yeah, I mean, that's the.
Is that considered high quality?
So do you think we should have a question? I'll kind of defer to you, whether you think that's to get feedback, or is it best to just leave it off for now?
I mean, it's up to you. I mean, it's not, I don't feel like it's a topic that's really.
Yeah.
It doesn't have as much public discussion as recreational marijuana did, but
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you think?
I-
You're talking with other towns on this, but that's
I
my
don't think it
sense
fits
is
in
that
with the
there's
rest of the
not a ton
survey.
of kind of public
Except,
conversation going on
It
about
doesn't
this.
seem like it.
It's kind of just a question that's kind of thrown out by itself.
Yeah, I wouldn't even put it
I
in.
mean,
Well-
if we're considering a store, how do we create the image of the downtown? We have a question that says, do you consider high quality items, traffic and convenience? And also, should we be putting in there on also medical marijuana
No,
store?
Yeah.
I mean, why would there be a separate question
no.
to dictate that?
I mean,
Well,
the
the
practical
only-
reality is that you
Is
don't.
that considered a
it's not
commercial
really. It's not
activity?
really even brought up in the comprehensive plan.
No.
But
no, except that we say that we try to encourage diverse businesses and, don't laugh, Dan. And so who knows what the people of town think?
Diverse.
If the people of town unanimously or a very high percentage say, no, not in my town, great. But if people in the town say it should be allowed, then I would want to know that if I were an elected official.
But it's a specific business.
No, but it's a
What if
business
we say-
opportunity in town.
No, I know, but what if we
And-
say, do we want to have an auto mechanic store downtown in Dock Square? Like that are replacing brakes? It's a niche, it's a very specific industry. Are we gonna say like, you know, we want these type of stores downtown? Are we gonna consider that retail, or are we considering it for the purpose of medical purposes only, and how does
It's-
that tie into a question? You know?
Well, the law's changing and there are new opportunities and towns have to decide.
My vote's to leave
I
it
don't
off.
fully understand it, but.
Yeah, my vote's to leave it off.
You know,
I don't,
Go
yeah,
down that
yeah, I don't wanna go down that path.
Simple.
survey, okay.
We already created enough
I've yet
stuff
to
like
do-
short-term rentals
that's
and,
what I'm saying. I wish we
We
had,
got enough projects going on.
Okay.
yeah,
All right.
I don't wanna get a new one.
not even one.
And this is just a, I guess, a logistical question, but moving question 7, which is with the descriptions of the town areas, do you want that to the very end of the survey, or would you like it just prior to the 2 open-ended questions about?
I agree with Paul, just because of the length and what is required to read through it. I kind of agree with you to
Yeah.
21 questions. How many questions are we?
Well, it'd be
37 right now, but.
37 is still, I mean, when you fill out a survey, hopefully they go through it.
Yeah.
You know how people are, they get halfway. and it's like,
Yeah, I mean, I'd be
it's not
happy-
just gonna take-
It fits
Yeah.
better when
It's
it
just
is.
the last 2 are open-ended
They're
questions,
open-ended,
so I
so-
didn't know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think you want it before the open-ended.
I would
Yeah.
think
Yep.
so, but.
Yep.
As long as it doesn't kick the open-ended into, well,
Do
it's online,
36.
you're gonna go through it, no matter what, to get to the end. Piece of paper, yeah,
But one thing
put it
for
between
sure.
the two, make it 30.
35?
36.
36.
They can put in with that one medical marijuana.
That'll be 35 because
35. All right,
36 won't change.
very good, thank you.
We're moving it from 7 to 35.
All right.
And as a practical matter, what's your advice on, if you're doing this as a Survey Monkey, and I get tired after 15, do my answers count? Would you program it that way, or you'd want people to complete it all in order to get credit?
Well,
You have a choice.
that would be up to you all.
I'm just raising the question because
Yeah.
you do have the option.
I would think you would want to include all of the responses, even if somebody didn't
Yeah.
finish the survey, but.
Right.
Yeah,
I mean, I think partial answers are better than no answers.
I agree.
Yes.
I want
You know.
some, I mean, if you get half of them.
Right.
And the other ones are just, you know.
yeah, I don't think they need to, I mean, because they may not know how to answer a question,
Mhm.
or may not have a comment. I don't want someone just putting a comment, just.
Right. And what about questions as you go along? I don't really have an answer, I don't really know,
Then
and I
you
just
skip
want
it.
to, I just want to skip it. Is that
Right.
okay?
That
It should be
okay.
programmed that you could skip a question.
Absolutely.
That'll tell us something too.
Yeah.
Or they just go right in the middle. I have no strong feeling one way or the other.
Skip the question.
And I'll also add a description about the anticipated time requirement. that
Perfect.
Yeah,
the
okay.
survey, hoping, less than 15 minutes.
So what's our target for getting this out? The only reason why I ask is I actually had communication with Lori today, and she was doing her letter for tax mailing, and asked if we had anything we wanted to add
Sure.
into.
When does that go out?
I have to get back to her. She sent it to me this evening, and I didn't respond. I don't know, so I'm not sure when she's sending that out. Do you know? The tax
Yeah,
letter thing?
so those articles, we wanted to have a sense of those articles by the end of this week.
Okay.
So really that question would be more, do you want to have a blurb in there saying that keep your eyes open for,
Yeah, that's what
for
I'm
a
thinking.
survey?
For a survey, so.
You know,
Yeah.
But, if that,
Well, how
I
do
mean,
we,
the reality of it is that you could have this survey ready to go before the tax bills go out. So, I mean, to get a notice that says keep an eye out for the survey, but yet it's already been here. Or we just hold off on the survey until after that notice goes.
what,
you know.
how else would we distribute this if not through the tax bills?
Well-
A separate mailing?
So what's going out in the tax bills is just a short newsletter. It's not the actual survey, itself.
Right, okay. So, we can't, can we do the survey through the tax bill or not?
No, but I think
Okay.
what we certainly could do is, if we.
When's the tax
We'd have to
bills?
we'd have to be quick about it. You'd have to have, the link to the survey.
Which is easy, you already have it.
You've got the link to the survey. If you got that, you could put that in the.
Right.
You
Yeah, we could put that in and then.
in that newsletter.
Okay, and then
Yeah.
if we put that in the newsletter, we can put where
Or-
to get one.
Right.
Right,
Right.
if you don't want to
Yeah.
click the link
If you don't want to click the link, you can get one.
by calling or picking it up, go by town hall, whatever.
Yeah.
Is there any other place we want to put them?
What, at the library?
That's a good
Library.
idea.
Yeah.
Town hall, library.
Yeah. perhaps.
Okay, so just the one other question, when you're doing a Survey Monkey, they can only do it once, right?
You can set different parameters based on different, sort of like filtering criteria. So if you want one survey from one IP address, you can set it up that way.
So
If
that's
you don't
one
want
per
to
household,
restrict, that's
because
one
each
per
household has one
household.
IP.
Um,
So it doesn't allow a husband and wife to do it that way.
Right.
Yeah.
Other towns that I'm working with on surveys have just said that they don't want to restrict who
Okay.
can complete the survey, and that the questions in the beginning, talking about demographics, and, if
Provide
the
the filters.
respondent is a resident, and a property owner, if they're a renter, year-round visitor, that will sort of filter out folks who maybe, shouldn't be taking the survey.
Mhm.
I was just thinking,
So
of,
the only-
someone who wants to influence it, and I'm gonna do 300 surveys.
Yeah,
You see, you,
time consuming.
or
Time consuming, but if you really wanted to influence something,
yeah, I mean,
Right.
you can say.
I can see
assign
Paul
you an IP
already on
address,
his,
but I
on
can
his
go.
bike paths.
I got 3 computers going.
I can go to other places, I can fill it out.
That's right.
It also
Not that
impacts
I-
people doing it at the library or public
Yeah.
areas, so.
No,
Right, you
Right.
can filter that, that's gonna all come from a subnet of IPs and,
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Yeah, you definitely wanna have,
They could do it at the library and then turn it right into the library too, so you don't have to mail it back,
right.
things like that.
So I
For people
guess-
in carpal tunnel that, fill them up.
I guess we leave it open then.
10,000.
We just risk that
Couple
some
head.
people might do more than one.
In the relation to town of Kennebunkport, you just made me think about, there's an awful lot of people who work in town who do not live in town, they can't afford to live in town. They're not a visitor, they would be a non-resident, non-property owner. But could we add, since we have an empty bullet, could we add work in town, or something like that? Non-resident, work in town?
I mean, what would be the difference between a
What's that?
non-resident, non-property owner and a
Yeah.
visitor?
See how they feel about
Right.
things.
and they may have lived in town before and they
Abby?
had to move out.
Under non-resident, non-property owner, what would be, I mean, it's a visitor, right? You're not a resident, you're not an owner. Are there, would be, other than being a worker that works in
Right.
town, right?
Yeah.
I mean, would there be another, can you think of another category would be? I mean,
Someone who used to live in town?
yeah, I guess, they don't visit anymore.
Still, are they a visitor at that point?
I'm just, yeah, I think,
What about a business owner?
Or prior,
the business owner, I guess.
A business owner, I rent a store in Dock Square. I'm a non-resident, non-property owner.
But I'm not a visitor.
Well, okay, so do we change that to a business owner? Non-resident business owner and then have the.
The non-resident
worker.
employee, yeah, employee, some way
Yeah.
to characterize.
And then, or you're a visitor. When we do it that way, that'd be,
So get rid
So you don't have
of
people-
non-resident, non-property owner?
yeah, just
Replace
saying
it with business owner?
non-resident business owner, non-resident worker, employee.
And put those two together.
And then,
Drop visitor to the bottom, say.
everybody else is a visitor.
I would put the two employment
yeah,
to,
separate, one above the
one above each other,
And then the
and then drop visitor to the bottom or drop visitor above it.
Okay,
So the two of those categories are together.
okay,
Very good.
all right. So I can make these revisions. So Werner, when would you need the link?
So Lori, would need that link, let's say Thursday.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then when would it hit the streets that anybody would have access to see it? When does it have to be live by?
You could put it in there, when it's gonna be live. You can give them the link and then say, this will be available.
I mean, I'm just asking in case there are any changes or,
Yeah.
I mean, I'd love to review this, I'd love to think about this, which I will, now that you've got it.
Well, I mean, the
It looks
tax-
beautiful, by the way, it looks
The
great.
tax bills won't go out until, those typically go out mid to end of August, I believe.
Okay.
So we have plenty of time.
Is when they
You guys
go
can
out.
delay the tax bills
So
if
we
you
can
want,
do a-
so we get this done.
Do it
I'm
on
I'm
September
fine with
1st.
that.
No,
Yeah.
sometime in August is fine.
Right.
Right, so.
We just have to get it done now. It's just a practical matter to get it, so
Get it all
that
lined up and
gets
stuff.
Right.
printed
So
and-
we can, at our next meeting, approve the final version of the
Right.
survey and
And the link won't
the
change.
link won't
No,
change.
the link
Yeah.
won't change. And I'll send the link to you all tomorrow or
Excellent.
Thursday.
Oh, great.
When I send it to.
Yeah, I'd love to go through it.
Yep.
Excellent.
Yeah,
You can clean us out.
Actually,
Great.
not in for a couple
Okay.
days.
Oh, okay. Do you want me to turn?
Any other discussion on the survey questions?
Great job, Abby.
Yeah,
Incredible job.
very good.
Yeah.
I propose that we hold off on B and C.
Oh, I
Looking at
think
the
that's
latest of
a,
the hour.
I think that's a
Well,
grand
I'll
idea.
leave it to the rest of the board.
Or are
Yes.
you serving midnight snacks?
No, I am not.
Jim looks like he's
Or a glass of wine, please.
I'm exhausted.
eyes look red. I second
What'd you do
that.
today?
Second that?
Oh,
tired.
We got
So Abby,
Yes,
thank you very
great.
much for your work.
Yes, thank you.
We've set the next meeting for
Set the next meeting for
Tuesday, August 21st, so
Tuesday,
now we
August
just need
21st.
Jim.
Hearing nothing else, I move to adjourn.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Hi.
All right. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah.
That
Am I late on that?
This is the longest we've ever had a meeting.
Yes,
Really?
yeah, don't give up, Mike.